Hi, welcome. I see everybody coming on in. I'll give folks a chance to log in and then we'll go on and get started. Hi, welcome to the Colorado Rural Housing Preservation Academy. We've got a few more folks logging in, so I'm going to give you another, I'll probably give it to 10:03 before we get started, so take a little bit of time. We're excited, I'm excited to see y'all again, or for you to see me also, and to continue pick up this conversation that we've been having about rural housing preservation in Colorado. So we will get started at 10:03. Thanks. Okay, everyone, it looks like most of y'all are getting logged in. So we're going to start with some introductions. I'm Robin Wolf. I'm the Senior Program Director for Rural Housing for Enterprise Community Partners, and you are taking part in the Colorado Rural Housing Preservation Academy. We're calling this Session 2, Topic 1, based on the idea that at one point we would have been in person and we would have had a full Session 2 on 515, 538, and the financing of preservation in rural communities. So as part of that, that's where our naming rubric comes from. Though I do find it somewhat confusing, so I hope that it doesn't confuse y'all too much. A couple of housekeeping notes. You probably heard as you logged on, the webinar is being recorded and all the audience members are muted as they log in. Please use your chat feature or the Q&A feature to submit questions during the presentation. It looks like we might have some stuff going on right now, actually. So they'll let me know with chat or Q&A if you have any questions for us. After the presentation, we will open up the lines for Q&A, and all participants will receive a copy of today's slides and a recording of the PowerPoint. And I will ask that you please be patient with technical difficulties. Today I am TA, technical assistance. I'm the tech person and the host of our session today. So it might be a little bumpier than it would have been otherwise. So please be patient. Quick agenda, we're starting 10 o'clock with some quick welcome introductions. We'll have a conversation about the 515 transfer and specifics. We will take a 5-minute break. I think it's really important for us all to have a little bit of time where we can step away from our screens for a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back and have a conversation about the 538 guaranteed loan product. And there will be 15 minutes for Q&A designated. Should there be a little bit more time or some time at the top of our first hour presentation, we'll bring Q&A in too, or as we see really pressing questions that could be answered better live, we'll get those answered for you. So don't worry, you'll have time to ask questions. Most of y'all have been in these sessions before, so you're familiar. I can also let you ask live if you prefer, by raising your hand to ask a question live. So we'll work all of those different magics that we can in this webinar format. And we're excited to have all y'all here and participating in this session. As I said, I'm Robin Wolf, and I work for Enterprise Community Partners. Our mission is that one day, every person will have an affordable home in a vibrant community filled with promise and the opportunity for a good life. That's our vision, actually. And our mission is to create opportunity for low and moderate income people through affordable housing in diverse, thriving communities. The Rural and Native American Program provides funding and training, along with TA, to organizations to help create safe, healthy, green, affordable housing in rural and Native communities, and that's the team that I work on. And our priorities consist of preserving affordable rural rental housing and the delivery of trainings and peer-to-peer learning sessions designed to help rural housing providers acquire and or preserve rent-restricted housing in their communities. That's why we're here today. This is the Colorado Rural Housing Preservation Academy, and that's a series of no-cost training and peer learning sessions with the goal to preserve housing opportunities across the state of Colorado. So we're really excited to have y'all taking part and to have been able to host all of these sessions. If you haven't already gotten the list of the sessions for the rest of the year, we have finalized that since we pivoted to virtual delivery and have published that, so I can share a link with you via chat in a bit to make sure you have all of those, and the registrations are live now for all of those sessions. We will also be doing a Buyers Sellers Conference this year, and our Buyers Sellers Conference will be virtual and regional. So we will be inviting our friends and partners in from Montana, Wyoming, Utah, New Mexico, I think that's right, in Colorado. And we're excited to have some other folks join us in the conversation, and we'll have the national office from USDA RD come in and talk about some of the regional realignment that's happening as well. Of course, I have to thank our partners. The Colorado Health Foundation is supporting the work of the Academy, as well as Fannie Mae and the Colorado Trust. So thank you to all of those groups. I'd also like to thank USDA RD, the Colorado office, for their support with just helping us with these sessions and thinking about the Academy itself, CHAFA, the Colorado Division of Housing, and all of those who've made time to be here. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our first speaker. Our first speaker is Larry Anderson from Get RD Done Right. Larry will be presenting today, and if you've been taking part in previous sessions, you've already gotten a chance to meet Larry. He's a former USDA official with 40 years of experience in housing, and along with many things, helped to create the USDA's housing inspection system. And since leaving USDA, Larry has worked with many agencies, including Enterprise, to help provide technical assistance for those seeking to pursue 515 transfers, and has seen them happen. They do happen. So, so we'll let Larry get started and talk us through how to get these deals done. So, Larry, you'll have to unmute yourself, and then you can take it away.
Okay, great. Hey, thanks, Robin. Hey, I appreciate you telling me I had to unmute. I probably would have talked for 5 minutes without a sound. Thanks, Robin. It's really a pleasure to be here again with you guys. Yeah, it's 40 years in this business, and it's been a challenge, and it's really exciting seeing these things come together. I'll tell you that. And they do happen. We can get transfers done. You can make a big impact. I used to tell folks in our RD field offices that it was one of the rare jobs where you could make a difference in the town that you lived in. You could see that property being preserved and serving the community like you wanted it to. And there's not a lot of jobs you can do that in, but it is real rewarding. And hopefully we can find a path to get that done. So with that, Robin, first page. And I want to do a quick just renewal because I want to put myself in your shoes. I've been working with a lot of nonprofits lately. I've been doing the technical assistance with the Enterprise Community Partners. And our goal is to provide technical support for nonprofits trying to preserve Section 515 housing. And again, it can be done. These things happen. So if I were you, and the last time we talked about what RD was looking for, about rents, rental assistance, restrictions, rehab. And this time I'm going to just turn it around a little bit and say this is what you will need to work on if you want to preserve these properties. And these can be properties that you've never seen before, but fall within your service area. These can be properties that you already own or already manage. There's a lot of opportunities out there. The portfolio desperately needs to be preserved and put in hands of people who want to keep it for a long period of time. So the place to start is that you want to find deals that work. Doing transfers is going to be difficult. You have to put a lot of work into it. There's a commitment of funds to get the due diligence done. You'll be putting your heart and soul into it. I can guarantee that. So your first blush is you want to find properties that are going to work for you. And we talked about rents that you want to see. You want to make sure that the property you're targeting for preservation has enough room in the rents to bump them up when you need to bring in new resources. And the best way to see what that room is without getting an appraisal is doing a rough estimate using FMRs or 60% tax credit rents for the county that the property's in. You can get that information. HUD's got a website. If you've ever visited the Nova Gradic income calculator, just Google it. It's a wonderful source of that information. You can pull out any county in the country and find out what that difference is. So you want to see what the difference between the current rents are and the FMRs or 60% rents. Next thing you want to look at is you want to know how much rental assistance is there, because that allows you to keep the rents affordable. It allows you to secure occupancy a whole lot better without rental assistance. There's no guaranteed threshold. When I used to do this for profits, we'd say 90% rental assistance was kind of the lowest that we'd want to work with. If you have one below 90%, doesn't mean it's out of the picture. There's opportunities to ask RD for rental assistance, and we've talked about that a little bit before. The next thing you want to know is the restrictive use provisions, because those are very important, because if you have restrictive use provisions in place, if you have a property with that was a 30-year term, 50-year AM, that's going to be very important because those properties were not allowed to prepay, so it'll affect the value. When you get your appraisal, your restrictive use provisions are going to be very important because they're going to reduce the potential market value of the property. And then the final one of the 4R analysis is the rehab. And RD is going to eventually require you to get a CNA, but this is going to also affect the transaction. RD is going to want to make sure the rehab is addressed in some shape or form. And the more rehab you have to do, the more expensive the transaction is going to be. So those are your 4 keys. You want to know the rents, the rental assistance, restrictive use provisions, and rehab. The next level, when you find something that looks good, then you want to dig into the actual operations of the property. There's a lot of knowledge that goes into this, and experienced underwriters can tell you probably a whole lot more than I can on it. But I'm just going to say the numbers that I look at are the return to owner. I want to make sure that it's being earned. I want to see if there's room for it to go up. Management fees. RD operates with standard management fees in every state. You want to make sure that you're earning that management fee and receiving it. And if there's any gap between what you're allowed and what the property is earning right now, you're going to want to be real interested in the current occupancy. Is there a vacancy issue? Is this property operating at full occupancy? If you're considering tax credits, you want to know if there's going to be eligibility for tax credits. Especially if the property's never had tax credits before, you want to get a real close look at whether or not tenant occupancy has to be affected or adjusted because of eligibility for tax credits. So if you have over income tenants, that's an issue as you explore tax credits. You're also going to want to know what the cash flow looks like to make sure that the property is making money. And if it isn't, why not? And also from a perspective of your relationship with RD in the future, you're going to want to know about the RD classification and findings. And I don't want to get into that too deeply right now because that's really something that's kind of on RD's purview, but it's important to know that if RD has a servicing issue with a particular property, you want to know what it is, how serious it is, and what you're going to need to address it if you're taking over ownership. So that's kind of the overview I want to get you going with. And next page, please. So you're looking around and you found a property that you're very interested in. So the next step is that, and this is before you'd signed a purchase agreement, is you want to get the information that you need to do your due diligence work, to understand where that property is, to answer the questions we were just talking about before on the previous screen. So I've developed a list that I always send out and ask for, and I would recommend that if you're considering taking over a property, that you ask for the same information. I always get it from RD because I want to be working with the same information that RD is going to be working with. I don't know if I talked about it before, but one of my constant disappointments is I find that restrictive use provisions are hidden from a potential purchaser. And it's just a tremendous waste of time if you're not aware of those. And if you run into those after you make a purchase and sales agreement and you're not able to meet the sales amount because the restrictions lower the value. So you always want to get this information from RD. They can provide it. And it also helps RD because at the end of the day, when you're doing underwriting and you're talking about the transaction, you want to be working with the same information they have, and RD wants to be working with the same information you have as well. So that way that you can build a level of trust. You're working off the same sheet of music, and it's important as you follow through because you don't want to go backwards on any of these things. So. Next screen, please. This is what I ask for, and I only want to touch on a couple of these. The first one is you want to get the operating budget, and there's actually you can get it in Excel format. You ask for the FIN 1700, which means Financial Report 1700. And that'll give you the last 3 years of the budget. And the thing to know about that is that spreadsheet plugs into the PAT, RD's underwriting template. So if you're going to do the PAT beforehand, RD is required to do the PAT. you want to be able to plug in those 3 years. It saves you a lot of entry work, and you'll get the documentation on how the budget looks. You want to look at the proposed budget, see what's being proposed in the future. The audited financial statements, the 3560-10 will give you the balance sheet, so you can have the outstanding balance. You want the original of loan agreements and notes, so you can see what obligations were put into those agreements and notes. For tenant occupancy, you ask for the project worksheet on PRJ 2000. And then you're also going to want to know any interest credit or rental assistance agreements. Interest credits are usually established. Sometimes they can be very valuable when you're dealing with Section 8 properties, because RD can bring those Section 8 property rents down significantly if it hasn't already been done before. Then you want to get the absolute most update information directly from RD's accounting system. They call it AMAS, A-M-A-S, and you ask for the M1FI screen, and it'll give you the current remaining unpaid balance. It'll also show if it's ahead or behind. It'll show you what the tax credit or the interest credit reduced payment is, and it has all the loan history on it. So it's very valuable. You want to see the M1FI. I was talking before about the restrictive use agreement and covenants, how it can affect the value so significantly. You want to ask RD for a copy of what they view as the restrictive use agreement and covenants. It's very important. Then there's also a wonderful little report called FIN 2000 that'll tell you what the reserve balance is. And if you've been working in RD before, you know there's several reserve balances. There's a authorized reserve balance, there's a fully funded reserve balance, and there's the current reserve balance. And there's a lot of weird interactions among those, but you want to get that FIN 2000 so you can see how RD views the required balance on that property. Then there's also this great rent history report called the PRJ 3050, and that'll tell you occupancy, or I'm sorry, that one will tell you about the rent history. So it shows you all the rent increases and utility allowance increases over the years. I remember working on one property where we couldn't figure out why rents were only about half of what the CERQ was, and we found out they hadn't had a rent increase in 20 years. So that's a red flag, and it turned out to be a very interesting history on that one. But you want to know what the rent history is. Are people getting regular rent increases? Are they keeping current? Have they been delayed? Has RD had a problem with approving rent increases for that particular project or that particular borrower, that particular management company? A lot of questions can be answered on that. Also, there's a quick check report, which will tell you the tenant occupancy information, tenant by tenant. If you're going to do a tax credit property, you really want to get that report, because that'll tell you, it'll alert you if you have some tenants who are going to be ineligible. There's the occupancy history for 5 years, PRJ 4200, and that'll tell you what the occupancy history has been for the last 5 years. So you can see if it's on a high note now or it's on a low note. If they had an adjustment, when did that happen? So that's very valuable as well. And finally, you want a copy of any original loan agreement and note. And also, if you're dealing with farm labor housing, you're going to want to know if there's a grant, and you want to get a copy of that, because grant agreements differ a little bit, and those can be influence what the property is going to look like. I'm going to stop right there real quick, because I know I've covered a lot of stuff. And
we do have a question from Steve Cordova. His question is, will RD freely provide this information, or is there a form that the current owner and interested party need to complete in order to allow this information to be released?
Fantastic. That's a great question. RD will not provide this information to anybody until it's authorized by the current owner. So what I've done, and I'm happy to share it with anybody, it's just it didn't come up on the as a PowerPoint screen real well. But you need to get the current owner, representative of the current owner, to authorize the release of this information. So again, in the kind of the way you'd be looking at this is once you found a property you're interested in, then you go to the owner and say, hey, I'm serious. I'd like to talk to you about this. I would like to take a look, but I need you to sign this release so I can get this information, and so I don't waste your time and we don't waste our time by attempting to get a purchase and sales agreement. That wouldn't work. So yes, you need to ask. Our RD will release this, but the current owner has to authorize it. And I'll just say that in my experience with this, every single owner who is serious about selling their property will be happy to release this information, and it's not really much of a problem getting them to sign it.
Thanks, Larry. We'll move on to the next slide, right?
Okay, next one. Thank you. Yeah, unless there's any other questions, because this is kind of a...
That's the only one that's up so far. So.
All right. Okay. And this one is kind of, it goes over the things I was covering on the first slide. When you're reviewing, you're doing this due diligence and you want to find out how the property's operating, you're looking at the return to owner, because that can be that can increase with a transfer. It can increase with a prepayment prevention incentive. So you want to see if it's been earned. A lot of owners, at RD, we had a couple of states in the past who said nobody's going to get a return to owner, and nobody earned a return to owner in those states. It's authorized by a loan agreement, and it's allowed. So you want to check to make sure the loan agreement return to owner is being what's earned every year. Management fee, again, every state has their own level. And if the property isn't earning the full level that's authorized in that state, you want to dig into that pretty deeply. We talked about reserves. That can be a big impact. A lot of sellers are going to want to take their reserves with them. RD can't allow that, but they want to be sure that the new purchaser puts money into the reserves to make sure that the property has a reserve level that's authorized by RD. Occupancy, very important. Eligibility for tax credits. I don't want to get into that too deep, but if you're looking at a tax credit transaction, you absolutely want to make sure your tenant occupancy is not going to be a barrier to that. Cash flow, if the property's making money, and this is one of those things you want to look at over the last 3 years. Typically, RD can allow up to 20% of your O&M expenses as a positive cash flow. So, that's important. You want to know what that is. And the classification and findings from RD. Again, you check with RD to see if they've got any issues with it. So if it looks good, back to our steps now. You've found a property that looks good. You've asked the potential seller for an authorization to release the information. You've looked at the information, and it's looking good. And it's looking like you might be able to support a reasonable purchase offer. And you can go ahead and make it. That's your big step. That's your big entry into the transfer process. And the only thing I'm going to say about purchase and sales agreement, and I've seen a bunch of them. I think every developer has their own that they work with. You will want to talk to an attorney about it to make sure that you've got a valid legal document. But the only advice I'll give you right now at this level is that you want to make sure that it says that the sales price is subject to RD approval. That can be your life raft if things go south. If you have a borrower who hasn't been telling you about restrictions and all of a sudden the appraisal comes in very low and you can't justify the sales price anymore, it's important to have that item in there. So the next screen, when we turn the screen, is going to be how to go through the process. So I want to give you one last chance. Any questions now about what we're doing here and anything else you might want to look at before you sign a purchase and sales agreement.
You must be very clear, Larry. So far, we've got no burning questions.
All right. Okay. Well, I'll be positive. I'll take it that way. Well, good. So this is going to.
We do have one. We do
Okay.
have one question. What is the reason to know about the return to owner? Nonprofit purchaser can't receive return to owner.
Excellent question. The return to owner is going to be a nonprofit can receive a return to owner if they're a GP of a limited partnership, which most tax credit transactions are. So what RD will allow is for the current return to owner to continue. And so you want to know what it is, and if there's any room to increase it. And you can increase return to owner by either receiving increased return to owner as a prepayment prevention incentive. And we talked about that a little bit the last time. I don't want to get into that too much. Or you can increase it by putting in cash for the hard costs of the rehab. And so there's some very specific rules about that. That'll come out in the underwriting template. But I always want to know what the return to owner is, because it lets me know whether the property's been operating at a level where it receives one, because they have to have a positive cash flow for it to receive one. And then I also want to know what the return to owner is, because if I think there's room to increase it, I want to be aware of that. And if there's steps I can take to increase it, I'd like to do that as well. Also, let me add something in. If you do pursue this as a nonprofit entity, RD does allow something they call a asset management fee, and it can be up to $7,500 per property. And so if a current owner is earning return to owner, that's a good sign if you want to ask RD to include asset management fee, a nonprofit asset management fee into the underwriting. So again, it can be up to $7,500 per project. For several years, RD really screwed this up and said it was $7,500 per nonprofit, which really messed up some nonprofits who had multiple projects all under the same ownership entity. But they've eventually corrected that, and it can be up to $7,500 per project that's owned by a nonprofit entity. I'll say one more thing about return to owner, and is that if you're looking at purchasing GP interests, RD doesn't allow any cash flow for the purchase of GP interests. That all has to be done off budget. And one thing we did as a for-profit developer is we would look at the return to owner to see what that flow was, and if that flow could be used to compensate for whatever cash we had to pay for the GP interest. So if you paid, say, $1,000 a door to buy the GP interest, you would want to know that you could secure financing that could be paid back from whatever the return to owner would be. So that's kind of a secondary reason, but that's another reason that you do want to look at the return to owner.
Thank you, Larry. We had one more question or comment. The asset management fee is very difficult to be requested. RD only allows for specific expenses allowed for it, like board meeting expense. And so therefore, Steve was saying that his allowed is minimal, like around $1,000.
All right, and again, I understood that's the way it has been operated in some states. I am aware of other states where they're very broad with that. Where I know of a nonprofit where they had a number of properties, and what they did is they actually had an asset manager doing the asset management responsibilities making sure the properties were operating correctly and they were structured correctly and that rehab was being pursued. And they received significantly more than just what the basic literal language that's in the handbook. So Steve, yeah, in the past, that's how RD had looked at it, but they do have a lot more flexibility to increase that asset management fee to be actually reflective of the costs that you have operating and owning one of these properties.
Okay, great, Larry. I think we've answered, oh, we'll keep on getting a few more. The expenses must be prorated over the portfolio and not duplicative is one of the comments that just came up. So,
yes, yeah, that, and I'll just I'll say, Robin, because this was a hot topic for a number of years, but I think it's kind of settled out. And the way that I administered it is that we looked at being able to have an asset management to be enough where you could actually hire staff to do the asset management function. There's no reason to underpay a nonprofit so they don't responsibly manage their property. There's going to be a balance. Not every property is going to get $7,500, but if you have a staff member, you have maybe a dozen properties, and you want to pay a salary of $30,000 or $40,000 to take on that significant asset management function, you can prorate that expense over several properties to make sure you can bring in somebody who can do the job.
Great.
All
Let's
right.
keep going.
All right. Well, yeah. Careful. I don't want to get too far here, but I'm going to cover the what's in the application right now, and this is kind of dry, and I realize this is not the most exciting stuff, but I think from what I've found working with nonprofits on this is there's a big mystery about what actually is required on for a transfer, and having put this, I'll admit this is one of my creations on here is we put together all the application requirements. We actually reduced the number that came into it, but there's a logic to it, and the documentation I don't think is too onerous. I'll just start off by saying that the important thing is that when you're working with RD, you want to make sure you come in with the transfer application as complete as you can get it. I would urge you to think about this as a tax credit application where you make it slick, you make it easy to read, you have it all put together. When we did it in the past, we put it on a CD and sent it into RD, and it worked really well because they have some decisions to make on their side. None of them should be very complicated, but there's some basic facts that you have to explain and bring out in your application. So I'm gonna go through this and just kind of let you know what they're looking for. The first section on your transfer application is going to be what is the transaction all about. You're going to put an executive summary that explains, the property you're looking at, the changes you want to make. Explains a little bit about your organization, talks about where the money's coming from, talks in general about what the rehab's going to look like, and also makes a statement about what you want to have come out of it. I mean, if you're serving the community and you've recognized the need, you explain that. If you're going to be upgrading with energy efficiency items, you explain that. But it's your chance to tell the tale about what your transfer is all about. Then RD is going to ask you for some required statements and certifications. There's 12 statements. I typically try to break it down in as few documents as you can get. There are statements the seller has to make. This is the whole deal. There's not any outstanding issues with the property, or if there is outstanding issues, here's what they are. The buyer statements, and those are basically, we're going to operate this property as affordable rental housing, and here's our commitment. And then you have joint statements that explain what's going to happen with any outstanding rehab, maybe any outstanding issues that are still out there with RD servicing concerns. But that's signed by both the buyer and the seller. So there's all sorts of information in the handbook, in Handbook 3, Chapter 7, and this is all laid out in Exhibit B1 that gets into a lot more detail. But that's how you start off. You're going to tell your story in your executive summary. People are going to make statements and commitments, the seller and the buyer, and the joint statement about where the property is. You have an application supplement that gets into a lot of detail, and it's a form that you fill out. You have the contact list for everybody involved with the transfer. That's always fun to fill out, and especially if you have a bond transaction. I remember one that we had kept modifying it, but we ended up with 6 pages with little tiny print about all the people that were involved with the process, and all the attorneys, all the management officials, management companies, the people with the funders. It can go on and on and on. Then you're gonna, there's also 3560-1, which is an application for if you're looking at a partial release, a subordination, a consent to some things from RD. There's some options on it, and you need to make that request in that document. RD is going to want to see a copy of your signed purchase and sales agreement. You know, what have you arranged between the buyer and the seller? What does the official legal document look like? What is the price on it? And then there's also going to be a current preliminary title report. This is the title report is you're probably going to have to get some legal help on this one. There's probably going to be a preliminary followed by a final title report, but that can be very revealing, and you need to have that included in the proposed transaction. And then finally, in this proposed transaction section, you have a legal services agreement, where basically you explain who's going to be providing your legal advice, and what's the agreement with your attorney. So that's section 1, proposed transaction. Next page, please. So the next one, here's one that can really be tricky, and I think it's really important that this part of it is worked out as best you can. This is the project and proposed repairs. And I think I remember in one of the earlier sessions, I was talking about how RD's role in these transactions is to make sure that the property comes out in good shape, that it's going to be able to, that it's the rehab is done, repairs are done, and it's going to last 20 years in really good shape. So they're going to require you that you have a capital needs assessment, and then you're going to come out with a repair agreement and a cost estimate based partially on that capital needs assessment. What you're going to want to make sure, if you're working on a transfer and you're bringing in third-party funding, and if they have any requirements that are beyond what the CNA has in it, that is explained very clearly in your repair agreement. You're also going to want to talk to RD real closely about what they feel needs to be supplemented from a capital needs assessment, especially from the perspective of handicapped accessibility, because the CNA will identify some of the accessibility needs, but a lot of times it's been a big emphasis in the agency for a long time. That whole idea about what are the accessibility features are needed is not fully expressed in the CNA. So your repair agreement and the cost estimate that comes out after that repair agreement, is very important that it includes what's in the CNA, what's in any third-party funders requirements, what's expressed to you by RD. And I'll throw one other factor in there too, is if there's something special that you want to do as a developer, a signature that you want to make sure is in that property. You know, maybe you want to improve community space, playground, something that your entity really wants to make a signature, that's included in there as well. So in your transfer package, then, the project and proposed repairs is expressed in those three items. The next issue is documentation of market rents and value. And so you're going to have an appraisal for USDA security value, an appraisal as is unrestricted, same report. And if the appraisal is done, you may not need a rent comparability study, and you may not need a purchaser's best available evidence to support CERQ if you do an appraisal. The thing I want to say about an appraisal is that you're always looking for two values. You're looking for the market value, and if the property has restricted has restrictions as restricted. If it doesn't have any restrictions, then it's just market value, and that determines what the sales price is going to be. And then the appraisal as improved, and I'm not sure why I have as is unrestricted up there, but you want it as improved because that establishes the value of making sure if you're going to put additional debt to do the rehab, that is supported by the security in the appraisal. Okay, next page. And I think we're going to I'll give you an opportunity to come back for questions on it because these are big topics, but I want to do the highlights right now. Then the next section is the financial aspects of the transaction. There's standard form 424, which is really general and has some attachments to it, but if anybody applied for federal assistance has to do that. The RD, proposed project budget on 3560-7 is very specific, and RD is going to want to know what their operating budget is going to look like expressed on their budget form. And then also the PAT template, and that's where you're going to document sources and uses of funds and your reserve account usage and the project operational status and the rents. It's all going to be expressed on the PAT template. And I'll say this just in general, RD is required to look at each transaction using the PAT. Sometimes they will require the owner to put that together as they make that and make their proposal. You probably should, because it helps you understand what your transaction looks like in RD's eyes. Although RD is ultimately going to be the party that comes up with the final PAT that's used for their approval process. So if you're bringing in third-party funding in the RD transfer package, they're going to want to see what your application looked like. They're going to want to look at financial pro forma information, which is on your PAT template. If the other third-party funder requires environmental information, you want that included as well. Commitment letters or the equivalent. And that's a big topic. I don't want to get into that right now, but if you receive a commitment letter from a tax-rated entity, that's included as part of your third-party funding. And then this one is, you want to think about this one as well, regulation requirements for third-party funding. What RD really wants to know is there something about your third-party funding that's going to require you to operate in a manner that's not exactly like RD? And that could be your occupancy list. If you receive home funding, do you have restrictions on who the tenants can be? So that's what they're really looking for there on that. And then also on third-party funding, whatever your interim financing is going to be, your construction financing is going to be, that needs to be included as well. All right, Bob is going to be talking a little bit about 538, but if you were going to receive 538 funding, that's going to be part of that third-party funding documentation as well. Okay, next screen, please. And the proposed purchaser. Here's where you explain about yourself, because RD wants to make sure that they're dealing with an eligible borrower who's capable of handling the property for at least another 20 years. So they're going to want to know a resume. When I worked for the for-profit developer, we had all the main officers of the corporation. We put in their bios and their resumes and explained our depth as an entity. And you would be required to do something similar. Previous participation certificate. RD borrows the HUD form where you document who your previous participation. If you're doing this development on a large scale, you have that on the word processor ready to go and add properties as you go through it. But they're going to want to know that you're a clean operator in the past. RD has a form, two forms, the 30 and 31, that talks about identity of interest, and that's required of everybody to certify if there's an identity of interest between you as a borrower entity and you as a management entity, or you as a funding entity, or you as a service provider entity, or you as a, what's the other one? Any connection whatsoever about identity of interest. And the important I want to make about this is identity of interest is not prohibited, but you darn well need to explain it on the certification. That's, and I've seen that in the past. We had a lot of issues about identity of interest, and I think ultimately RD said, yeah, it's okay, provided, number one, you identify it so everybody is aware of it, and number two, there's no unjust expense because of it. So it's important that you look at that carefully. Then there's also the debarment suspension certificate certification, and that's a standard administrative form. Purchaser's financial statement. So if your entity is going to have what their financial strength is, that's extremely important if you're going to be making, especially for-profit entities. And as the larger your portfolio gets, it's more important and it'll get more scrutiny. But basically, RD just wants to know you have the financial wherewithal to honor the commitments that they're about to make. Credit report fees, and RD is going to requires a check for any of the principals in the organization so they can do a credit report. And finally, proof of citizenship with your federal tax ID or social security number. And there's a variety of ways of explaining that, but basically you do have to provide proof of citizenship within the application. Okay, proposed management. Here's if you do your management yourself, you're gonna be required to provide all this. If you're going to secure third-party management, then your third-party management company is going to secure these items. But you got a management plan. You have to have an attorney's opinion expressing whether the lease is in compliance with RD requirements. There's a management certification. It's on a form that RD requires that to be signed, and the affirmative fair housing marketing plan, which is RD's has adopted the HUD form to express how that plan works. And one more slide, please. And finally, I think I'm going to wrap this up here, is proposed organizational documents for the purchaser. And here's where you really need your attorney to come in. You're going to have your organizational documents together and a attorney certification certifying legal sufficiency of the organization and its ability to borrow money. So you can have drafts to start off with, but by the time you get to closing, your organizational documents need to be final, and you have to have a certification from your attorney saying, yeah, everything's legal. Because RD really doesn't make a judgment on that. They're going to rely on your attorney's certification. So that's fairly important that you have that done and have somebody who's going to put in the time to make sure it gets done as well. And finally, these are I've just listed them under other, but these are standard forms that need to be filled out. But basically what this does, and I've seen this from a compliance perspective, this ties the owner into all the federal laws that apply to receiving federal money. So these aren't really necessary for housing, and they're not RD requirements, but they're requirements that have to be added in to address like the equal opportunity agreement that you're going to operate, per equal opportunity laws, lobbying certificates. They threw in the drug-free workplace, collection policies, but here's two good ones. To say the best to last. If you have a HUD contract, you need to have a document from HUD saying that the HAP contract is going to continue under the transfer. And the final one here is request for rental assistance. If you don't have 100% rental assistance, you need to fill out a form saying, yes, I would like rental assistance for anybody who doesn't have it. And RD doesn't necessarily, they're not necessarily going to act on that, but it's good to have that part of your package, and that, RD being aware and put on notice that you want them to act to provide you rental assistance. So this is my thumbnail schedule, Robin, about what's in a transfer document. A lot of good stuff. There's a lot of things to talk about this. I mean, I'm not sure when we're going to hit the Q&As on it, but I wanted to make sure everybody got an overview of it to make sure that there's no mystery behind it. These are you'll have a fairly good, I guess you can see me, a good stack of documents at the end of the day here, but they all should be documents that are logical, that there's a reason for them to be included. A lot of them can be dispensed with fairly quickly. Some of the issues that usually delay things is getting some agreement on the CNA and the appraisal, and we talked about that before, about being able to get those things going early. Other hang-ups are going to be on the repair agreement, so that if you have multiple requirements, that's all laid out. And if you're going to do management for the first time, that can usually be that can get hung up if you haven't gotten those documents together before for RD and some other transaction. Let's see, and it also is important to have an attorney that's somewhat familiar with RD requirements when it comes time to look at the lease and certify about your organization being ready to deal with all the intricacies of the RD program. It's important to have a kind of legal staff on board so that you're able to address anything that does come up. So that's what I got as the start here, Robin.
No, that's great, Larry.
I'm not exhausted just yet.
Thank you. I think we have a couple of questions, and we'll be able to answer a few of these questions now, and then what we don't get to, we can put it at the end. But first, one of the questions that's a simple yes or no: is there a source of RD forms in fillable format, like this list of forms that you gave? Is there a way to go and just kind of access them all and be able to fill them out?
Oh my goodness! I've been able to Google them. Just put it that way. I've been able to Google them, and it's real. I've got a list that I have on file because I've used it for several applications now. But especially when you get to the AD forms and the RD forms, they're really, RD doesn't have a real good access point for their forms. So I just Google them, and I really haven't had a problem with a lot of them.
Great. Philip, it looks like you raised your hand, so I'm going to allow you to talk. Okay, Philip, you have to unmute there.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, we have a site called eForms. It's just EFORMS. If you Google eForms rural development, it'll probably be the first thing that you find, and you can click on that. If you have an eAuth level 2, you can actually log into your account and go through all the forms that we have there. And those are the most updated forms, and there's a help box that you can click on. It'll give you instructions on how to fill out the forms. So everything from the 404 to the 401 to the 1049, all the forms pretty much that are listed there are on that site, including all your tenant certification forms and your budget forms that you need to submit.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for that, Philip. That was really helpful. And thanks for being part of this session so that we can have some really good conversation and get good live answers. So thank you very much. We have a few more questions. For the repair agreement, does USDA RD require multiple bidders, or is this repair agreement the live actual agreement with a specific vendor or a sample for contractors to bid on? And
Philip, you want to handle that one, because that kind of varies. There's a lot of things in it, but and there's a reg that talks about the whole construction process, and but what happens? It varies. It varies a lot based on the size of the rehab that you're gonna provide, and the type of construction that you're gonna choose, whether you have it in-house or you're contracting for it. So Philip, I hope you can answer that one, because
it does look like
I was actually answering another question in the chat box and I missed the whole question.
Well, I think it looks like maybe it was answered in the chat box as well, is that the repair agreement is addressed under 3560.406 parentheses D parentheses 7. So that's the reg that you need to refer to, it sounds like.
All right.
Anonymous attendee.
I am always so anonymous attendee, exactly. I am always very impressed by anyone's ability to so quickly cite reg numbers, because it is not among my skill sets to be able to do such. And then there was one other question about what the typical timeline for RD was to review and approve a transfer application. And this is for the purposes of including in an LOI and the PSA.
I can start with that one. Larry can chime in. You know, a typical transfer that's simple and easy usually takes 3 to 6 months. If someone just wants to come in and assume the loan and move on. If there's a lot of construction going on, we have documents that we have to review for the construction process, and you're looking at closer to a year, because we have to look at the environmental, things like that. If it's simple transfer, as in, you know, rents aren't really going to be impacted, tenants aren't going to be impacted, like I said, 3 to 6 months is possible. The last one that we did took about 4 or 5 months, and that was a more complicated transfer. We're working on one right now that'll probably take 3 or 4 months. Neither of those had a lot of construction involved. So on our bigger projects with construction, obviously, just to get to closing, you know, if you've got additional funding coming in, reviewing the construction documents can take close to a year.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add in is that I'd look at this in about three different phases, and that's helpful to break it down about the amount of rehab. But the first phase is going to be able to get your CNA and appraisal reviewed and approved. Sometimes that can be really quick. Sometimes that can take forever, especially if you've got disputes going on about the CNA and the appraisal, or there's some disagreement, or the CNA and appraisal aren't done in the proper format. That can take years. But if you can get through that fairly quickly, and the thing that I've always recommended is that you get RD and your appraiser, your CNA reviewer together as early as you can to eliminate those problems as much as you can. That can really cut down the amount of time. Now, RD actually, Philip, in the handbook, I can never remember the numbers, but there's some processing deadlines for the transfer application once you have it incomplete. So if you submit a complete application with your CNA and appraisal in it, I think it's 60 days is the processing time before you get an approval decision. And so I view that as the next block. And then the next thing that you're worried about is getting your closing done. And that's where you have to line up a OGC within RD to participate in that, or within USDA, the Office of General Counsel within USDA. And that can be, it depends usually on your third-party funding requirements. RD is usually going to do everything they can to meet your third-party requirements to have closings completed. I'll say that, and that's a real positive thing, because they recognize the urgency of making sure that they don't lose that third-party money. So I view it again then as 3 kind of windows. You got your pre-application when you're doing the CNA, and you're doing the appraisal. You have your application processing period, where usually the holdup is if one of the documents you have doesn't satisfy what RD is looking for. And then after you have the approval of the transaction, between that and closing. And those numbers can vary a lot.
Yeah, there's always variables, and everything is everything's unique. I kind of feel like a lot of times when we're working in real projects, we're all unicorns. And that's okay. Unicorns are lovely. So I think that with that, it's 11:05. We're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 11:10, and we'll be able to listen from Bob Morton from Bellwether Enterprise to talk a bit about 538 guaranteed loan product and learn a little bit more about what actually, once you get this transfer approved, how you're going to finance that. So I will see everyone again at 11:10. You keep your, don't log out of the session, but feel free to take a break. That's what this time is for. Thanks. Bye. Bob?
Yes.
Is there audio for this video?
There is, but it's not going, so.
Right.
I think, Bob, if you try and switch your audio setting on your computer in Zoom, if you go to the little microphone up arrow, you can select which microphone to use, and that might help with the audio.
Okay. Well, we're through the video anyway, so it was just a nice caption of Bellwether. And so Bellwether is a full-service commercial mortgage real estate company. We do specialize in multifamily housing and especially in affordable housing. I've been working in the affordable housing, rural housing, and FHA space since 2004. I have been with Bellwether since 2009 and have done hundreds of projects all across the country through the rural housing program alone. And probably it's been about a 50-50 split between providing the 538 debt with new construction or sub-rehab of non-515 deals, and then about 50% has been in conjunction with the 515 program. I did want to also introduce a coworker of mine. Her name is Anthea Martin. She is located in Denver, and she's part of our affordable housing team. We do have a designated affordable housing team that strictly works on affordable housing through our different forms of debt execution, which is FHA, the USDA product, Fannie and Freddie, and we do have some proprietary bond products and some other tools in our box. But Anthea is located there locally, should you ever want to reach out to her. But to her or myself directly would be great. We both work on the same team, so you're going to get to the same place no matter what you're looking for in your form of execution. So I just wanted to introduce her real quick to the group. So my key to talk about today is the USDA 538 program. It is a guaranteed program. I'm going to pull up an overview of the program and then hit some highlights, and then we'll sort of mix it in with the 515 spectrum, which is the reason why we're all here today. So the 538 program is a guaranteed program. So USDA issues a guarantee. We as a lender, we fund, service, underwrite the debt execution. We submit applications to RD for them to approve of the 538 loan. and it is strictly at the moment for new construction or sub-rehabilitation of multifamily housing, and it has also helped greatly across the spectrum for the acquisition, revitalization, repair, and transfer of 515 direct housing programs. It does not have a refinance straight vehicle as of yet. We do know that RD is trying to help and work on one, but right now the program is only for new construction or sub-rehab. A question I always often get asked is, what is the minimum threshold for the sub-rehab? And that's $6,500 per unit, which is it's a pretty low number and very easy and able to achieve without doing much work to the project at all. In addition, any of the slides that I have here today, Robin and Susan have or will have, and you can contact me directly, and I can share all of this information with anyone who is interested. Some of the underwriting criteria for the 538 program is 90% loan to value. That's going to be the restricted value based on the restricted rents. The debt service coverage minimum that needs to be met is 115. If you are wrapping in a 515, the combined debt service coverage with the 538 and the 515 cannot fall below a 1.0. Typically, both us as a lender, an underwriter, and RD, and you as a borrower should want more coverage than the straight 1.0 to give some cushion and some cash flow to the project. So, but the minimum criterion is 115 for the 538 and a 1.0 globally between the two forms of execution. The loan to cost maximum is 70% loan to cost, and that's loan to development cost. That's both for the permanent loan only, or the construction perm. The 538 program does offer two different forms of execution, which is the construction perm. We provide a construction loan that then converts into the permanent loan, and it has a continuous guarantee from rural development. Or you can obtain a conventional construction loan and do all the rehab or new construction. And we would have the commitment from RD. We could do a forward rate lock, which is required by most borrowers and the partnerships to have in place before you start the rehab. And that maximum is 70% loan to cost, even for the perms. Now, if you do have a 515, if you're doing the perm only scenario, you can go up to 90% loan to cost, and that is assuming the 90% loan to restricted value and the debt service coverage meet. That is one of the key items. We rarely ever get up to the loan to cost ratio of 90% or even 70%, because most of these transactions are done with tax credits. As you can see, I'm getting some emails, are done with tax credits. A high level of all of the deals that have been done in the country with this program have been in conjunction with low-income housing tax credits, both 9% and 4%. And we'll talk about that more in a little while. But your primary underwriting criteria will be 90% loan to restricted value, the debt service coverage of the 115, and likely restricted by 70% loan to cost. And if it's a 515 and you're doing the perm only, you can go above 70%, but RD on the 538 side has restricted, if you're doing the construction and perm option, that even if it's a 515, you're restricted to 70% loan to cost. One of the great features of this loan product, it does allow for a 40-year amortization. The term has to be a minimum of 25 years, but it can also then go up to 40. So you can do a true 40-40 term and amortization, but we can do with a balloon that in case you have, let's say, other subordinate debt that does not have a term of 40 years, it's standard real estate practice to have the senior debt which the 538 is required to be in first position at all times, and all other forms of debt, including the 515, must subordinate to the 538. So if you do have some other forms of debt that have a shorter maturity that need to be at least 25 years, we could do a 25-year term and a 40-year amortization. Or if you have, let's say, a lot of our deals do have home funds and home loans, and those are typically 30 years or 35, and we can do a 30-year term with a 40-year amortization. So there's lots of flexibility there with the term and amortization. Let's see, a couple other things to highlight. Interest rates are really low in the market, depending on whether you're going with a perm forward and how long is the forward. But right now, the high end on interest rates for a 24-month forward, and it does also depend on the loan size, but assuming the loan size is, let's say, $1 million, $1.5 million, or $2 million, the rate on a 24-month forward is somewhere in the low 4s to very high 3s, depending on the size of the loan. And then on the construction side, that interest rate is in the mid to low 3s as well. So the very good interest rates for this loan product, especially in this environment where treasuries and Fed rates are extremely low. I did mention home loans. Another one of the great components of this form of execution is there are all types of secondary financing allowed. Obviously, the 515 would be able to subordinate. We've had seller held seconds, home loans, CDBG, any other forms of state, local, or federal loans are also able to come on as long as they subordinate to the 538. When you do have the 515, there is another subordination agreement that is used when a 515 is involved, and that is where it becomes the 538 as a form of debt is really, in my opinion, and in most of the lenders market, is about the only form of other true must pay hard debt that will match up with the 515 because of some of the belts and suspenders that RD has rolled out with their subordination agreement since the beginning of the year. So we're here for preservation and 515 projects. This is your choice of primary debt to go along with your 515 project if you're looking to rehab it, both with tax credits or potentially without. A developer fee is allowed, even if there are no tax credits on the project. So that is something that we can discuss and negotiate between lender and borrower and along with RD as needed. And there are some other fees. I just don't want to touch on every item on here. I just wanted to hit the highlights, of which I think I have done. Again, it's a 40-year term, 40-year AM. Loan to cost, typically around 70% loan to cost. And the loan to restricted value is 90% loan to restricted value. So as I discussed previously, most of the projects that have been done with the 538 program with a very high percentage, probably in the 95% plus range, have been done with either 9% or 4% tax credits. Mixing in the 515 preservation, again, which is why we're primarily here today for, you can do the tax credits. 9% are done good, whether it's on a portfolio basis, that's meaning more than one 515 property, or you can do it as a standalone. In the 4% tax credit arena, typically those are done as portfolios. You will find some standalone 515 properties that you can do a 4% tax credit execution with. but those are typically the much larger 515 projects in the country. We have a couple of those that are under renovation right now that are 4% only tax credits with some home funds and our 538 funds to round out the sources of funds. I did, when I was talking with Robin, we did want to make sure that we discuss, because we know how hard tax credits can be achieved, both on the 9% competitive rounds and then how expensive and difficult 4% bonds can be. And the scale of either the size of a property or the number of properties you need to bring in for a portfolio to do a portfolio with 4% bonds. But that is the 4% route is a great avenue if you've got the number of properties or the size of properties to make a bond execution work, given the expense that it entails to do a bond transaction. But we have been doing a handful of 515 deals. We're working on a couple of them right now where they have no tax credits, and the projects are in okay condition, but they do need some renovation and some rehab, and they're not looking to achieve tax credits. So they're looking for just the 538 to come in and supply some meaningful source of capital to do some moderate renovation, is what I call it, to the properties. At times there are some home funds that can be obtained, or some other sources of state or local grants that you can put into the mix. Obviously that's state by state and community by community. But it is possible that you can obtain a 538 loan to do the renovations you're looking to do. The key, and Larry really hit on a lot of it earlier, is going to be all through the budgeting process with rural development on a post-rehab or post-renovation budget. So increasing the rents, increasing the rents, getting better occupancy by having nicer and complete units if you have some down units. With the renovation, hopefully there's some line item expenses and operating expenses, or if you're going to bring in some new management agent that has a little bit more competitive percentage of cost and fees to get the operating expenses down so you can get the NOI up. And that is absolutely key, that you work with rural development on your budget and the scope of work that you're proposing. And I know it's difficult when you don't have tax credits and you don't know the true size of the 538 loan yet, because you have to get through the budgeting process to see if the NOI is suitable to take on a meaningful 538 loan to do a meaningful renovation to the project. And in addition, you're going to want to make it worth your while and time to have a decent return to owner as well. So the budget and working with RD on working that budget, trying to get more rents or additional rental assistance is absolutely key in the discussions we're having today to truly make a 538 loan big enough so that it can do true renovations, meaningful renovations to the property. What's a good fit sort of rule of thumbs, and I really did hit on them for the 538 program with the 515. Tax credits are typically no-brainers. We do what we call gap financing to fill a little bit of the gap that's needed to wrap up the renovations to the property and really help downsize that developer fee and the amount of deferred developer fee to get make the project feasible to the developer and owner, and get the property renovations, the desired renovations, complete. So anytime you have a 9% deal, standalone property or portfolio. Those are typically no-brainers. The 538 works great with the tax credits and the 515. The 538 is in first. You have, it's a guaranteed loan from RD, and then you have the subordinate, the 515 second, which is a direct loan from RD. So it's an RD product on top of an RD, which is another reason why they work so well. And the 4% low-income housing tax credits are another great form and no-brainer good fit for these properties and the 538. And then you get down to, okay, we don't have tax credits. We're not going for tax credits. It's either too competitive, or you just don't have the scale for the 4%. So it comes back to, what is the budget that you can work with? What is the budget that RD can work with you in to get a meaningful size 538 loan to renovate the project? And that really is the key to taking on a 538 loan or any other form of debt that could be in conjunction with your 515. Again, you're going to be pretty hard pressed to find any other form of debt to go along with the 515 because of the 515 subordination agreement that RD rolled out at the beginning of this year. But to me, there is no better form of execution, even if the subordination agreement was a little less belts and suspenders and more industry standard than the 538 program, given that it's RD debt on top of RD. You're going to be hard pressed to find those interest rates that we discussed, the options of a construction perm or a perm only, and the very generous underwriting of loan to cost, loan to value, and debt service coverage. So even when you have tax credits, the budget is going to tell the story. What can you and RD work out with in the budget to allow for additional debt, for additional repairs, and the return to owner to you to make business sense to do the transaction. You can do stay in owner. That doesn't have to be a transfer. So you don't have to go through the entire transfer process, but if you are looking to be a stay in owner and you want to take the 515 and have it re-amortized over 50 years at 1%, you will have to go through a lot of the underwriting steps that you would in a transfer. You would definitely go down what I call a parallel track of underwriting with the 538 and the 515. We can share third-party reports. We can share inspection reports. The third-party reports are appraisals, market studies if required, CNAs, potential plan and cost reviews, and phase ones with RD's form of NEPA required. But that is an overall big picture discussion. Of course, there's more details. A lot of that is in when we get the numbers and we run the numbers. I do have a case study that I can share with real quickly, and this is on a 9% transaction with a portfolio of 515 that are under renovation right now. And let's see if we can make this larger. Okay, I'll click through it. So it's a 3-project portfolio, 515s, with 1 borrowing entity, 1 tax credit application. There was 3 transfer applications with the 515, and even though there is 1 borrowing entity, one borrowing entity and 1 tax credit application, there are 3 different sets of capital stack. So each project has its own 538 loan, its own 515 subordinate loan, and the tax credit equity that's allocated to each project. You can consolidate 515 properties if RD does allow. When you do bring in a 538, it does make it a little more difficult to consolidate if they're not in the same rental market. But if they are in the same rental market, the same county, you can combine them as well to make a more efficient project with what would be called a scattered site. So we have one called Hillside Village. Was built in 1996, 24 units, 15 units of RA. The 538 loan was $417,000. The 515 assumption was $704,000. We had a debt service coverage of 1.99, and globally with the 515 involved, we have a coverage of 1.178. So a nice set of coverage there. The 538 loan to cost was 52%, and the loan to, combined with the 515, the loan to cost was 21%. And each one of these of the three, okay, come on down, are going to be very similar. Another one, this is in, all three of these are in Oregon, built in 1986, 42 units, 21 units of RA. The 538 loan was bigger on this one, 1.4. The 515 was 1.2 million. The coverage on the 538 is 1.557. The global coverage, including the 515, is a 1.15. So again, some nice global coverage. And the overall loan to cost was 31%. I'll click on one more. This is Woodside Village in Rogue River, Oregon, built in 1985, 36 units, 22 units of RA, 538 loan, $820,000. The 515 loan, $938,000. The debt service globally with the 538 and 515 is a 1.15, very similar to the other project. And the overall loan to cost combined with the 538 and 515, 29.53%. Again, this is on a tax credit project, which most of these are done, but we are able to do renovations with just the 538 and the 515. But again, it comes back to the budget and what is the NOI going to allow a meaningful size 538 loan to do renovations to the project. The CNA will also play a large portion of the decision making on what repairs need to be done now in the near term, midterm, and long term. And then RD always has a wish list as well to try to squeeze in as much and needed repairs as possible to sustain the housing and supply some really good housing to our rural communities. So that is the 538 program overview with some samples of a case study, what fits good, and an overview of the loan product itself.
Awesome, thanks, Bob, for that. And I always like seeing case studies and seeing pictures of stock that looks like stock we know, and resonates with the kind of the types of projects that we're trying to get done. We do have a few questions that came up in the chat. Larry, it looks like you had some questions. Do you want to just turn on your video and go on and ask those questions?
Sure, absolutely. I didn't know how to raise my hand, so I was like, but Bob, I really appreciate the background on it, and it's always interesting to see how much more integrated the 538 is into the 515 program. I had two quick questions for you. One is, can you use 538 to pay a sales price?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, if allowed, if allowed by RD for an equity payment.
That's fantastic news. That's really good news. So, so you could actually use 538 as your whole source of funding if you're not using 9% credits.
Correct. If the numbers work, as always.
Excellent. Oh yes, right. Yeah. Always. You have to have that qualification in there. The other issue that I wanted to ask you about was farm labor housing, because this is a 515 preservation academy, but we do have folks who work in farm labor housing as well. And I have heard that 538 can be used with farm labor housing. I just haven't seen anything in writing on that. Have you done anything with farm labor housing, and are you aware if that's compatible?
You can use the farm labor housing. We have not, because it is just rarely done, but I know that there have been one or two done in the country. I know there was a rather extensive one done in Hawaii. Unfortunately, we weren't the 538 lender on it, but I do know of that product, and that was with the farm labor housing.
Excellent. Okay. And so if we're working with folks and they start looking at a property and it looks good, and but they can see that it's going to be difficult getting a 9% transaction through. What's the process for getting together with a lender? So they just give you a call?
Yep, they just start the discussion, give me a call. As I discussed, and as you know, a lot of it all goes back to, have you talked with RD about what you're wanting to do? Have you talked with them about increasing rents or getting additional rental assistance? And talking with them about the scope of work you're trying to do at the property and that it needs. I mean, not every deal in the country, there's thousands and thousands of 515s all across the country. Not all of them are going to get tax credits. Not all of them can, put the scope together to do a big bond deal in portfolio. So these properties are going to have to get renovated somehow, and the best way to do it is to take on another form of debt, which is the 538. And in order to support, meaningful debt and renovation to the property, the NOI through the budget's got to be there, and that's the direct discussion, with the current owner or want to be owner of a property, to get that budget right so that it can support meaningful debt and also give some return to owner.
All right, fantastic. That's good to hear.
Yeah, we've got a few more questions that have come in through both the chat and the Q&A. One thing, Bob, is they want to know if we can get a copy of the term sheet and a copy of the case study doc. I think as long as you get that to me, I can send that out to everyone.
Sure, absolutely.
And then there's a question about whether or not there's certain types of properties or property characteristics that make 538 loan product work really well.
Well, it's a pretty simple answer, even though it can be more broad, but any type of multifamily housing, typically what you see is more community oriented. It's very difficult to do a 4-unit project or a 10-unit project. The costs between third-party reports and lender fees, legal fees, RD fees, just doesn't make it very viable for smaller projects. So much more of a true community type project that has, let's say 25, 30 units or more, is sort of that shorter, lower end of units that will work, even though we are willing to help and look at others that are smaller, but without the tax credits, and you have a small number of units, the costs really stick out like a sore thumb and make it really not feasible to do. So you really want to get a good size loan for a decent size project, and get that budget really worked well with RD to make these work.
Yep. And as we talked about before, we have a lot of unicorns that hang out in rural parts across the country, and Colorado is no exception to our unicorns, right, for sure. So there was one more question that came through in the chat about how the construction to perm piece works. If you're financing your rehab with 538, So could you speak to that a little bit, Bob?
Sure. So instead of going out and getting a construction loan, and let's say it's the 515 piece and the 538 only, so we would be the construction lender. It's a continuous guarantee from rural development that once you've completed construction, you convert to the permanent loan. So the underwriting is essentially the same. We're going to underwrite the borrower, the project, the architect, the general contractor, the management agent. The plans and specs, all the same third-party reports are required. So the underwriting is effectively the same whether you're doing a construction perm or a perm only to take out a construction loan if you wanted to go that route. The timeline for a construction to perm, assuming the 515 is moving along at a good pace, but if you went down a parallel track and the 515 was right on track with the 538, you're probably looking at about a 6-month process from beginning to end to close. You would then complete construction. Bellwether, along with rural development, is going to review and approve all draws. We're going to have an inspection of each draw and sign off. We'll have you'll have to submit change orders. You'll have to have a legit general contractor on board, a legit architect. Each month we'll have an inspection. RD typically on all 515 deals typically attends those. We then have a third-party professional do the inspections for the lender, and altogether we review and approve draws and change orders. Once construction is complete, you would do a cost certification, which there is a form for that. If you don't have tax credits and are required to do an audited cost certification, and there's other items in RD's commitment in order to convert to the perm. You'll need certificates of occupancy if they're being reissued, or the architect's certificate of substantial completion. All insurance will have to be in good order. So everything that you would normally expect to have done once you've completed construction and have all that in order is really what's in the condition in order to convert to the permanent loan. We then work together to get all those items in line. We then submit packages to RD and request a date to convert to the permanent loan, which is always on the first of a month. And then we get the approval, and then we start the amortization with principal, interest, and the required reserves that we need to collect. So from beginning to end, if we were to start today on a project and the 515 went down a good timing path, it would take 6 months for us to start to then get to construction. But I will have to be honest with everyone here that it is typically not that quick with a 515 involved. It's usually not the 538 that's stalling things behind a little bit, but it is more with the 515 and the budget. And if you're doing a transfer app and already form of final underwriting, it's typically the 515 that lags behind a little bit, but not always. But if there is some lag outside of that 6 months, it's typically some of the processes that are going on with RD with processing the 515 approval.
That brings up one other question, and I just want to make sure we do have some time for a few more audience questions too, but it's come up in the past as we've been talking through these processes for the past several months here in the state of Colorado, the sequencing of this process, right? And Larry, you talk a bit about, going to RD and asking questions. But then there's also kind of the conversation is they want the transfer application all complete. And so, and then there's, if you're going to go pursue tax credits, should you pursue the tax credits and get the award before you submit the transfer application? It seems like there's a lot of different ways to sequence it, but if there is there, this is a question really for both of you, because both of you have done more of these deals than I have done, or we've really done here in the state. Is there a best or most efficient way to sequence this process?
Is it for me or Larry or both?
It's to either of you. Yeah,
well, Bob, shoot, I'll jump in because I've got general advice. And I actually had a follow-up question for you on it too. But the general advice is that you want to keep everybody in tune to this as you can, because what I've seen work best is when you line up the third-party funding first, and then you go through the 515 process. But you gotta let RD know what you're doing, so that way they're not hit unexpectedly by processing that comes in at the last minute. So I emphasize communication, and you try to get people together. You have Zoom meetings, you have calls to have everybody track through the process as much as you can. So I'm not sure how 538 all fits into that, Bob, but that's kind of my general advice on it.
Yeah, I mean, you really want to try to work hand in hand. There's two different topics here. Are you getting tax credits, or are you trying to do something without tax credits and just other sources of funds and 538 debt? But to me, it all really starts back with starting the discussions with rural development and talking to them about what the properties need in terms of renovations for sustainability and preservation, and talking about rents. What is there to, if you don't have full RA, can you get more RA for units? Is there any available? And can we get some rental increase? Because that budget, if the budget is very tight, there's not going to be anything there for debt service, which means you're going to not get a very good sized loan to do some meaningful renovations to the property. And us as a lender, it wouldn't be good lending practice if we were just doing just the bare minimum that then needs to come up again in say 5 years, and there's no form of debt or viable net operating income to take on anymore. So it's got to be some meaningful source of funds, whether it's equity from tax credits or debt from the 538 and any other grants or sources that one can obtain for that property to do some meaningful renovations to the property. But to work it all in tandem, you do, like you said, you have to be in communication with everyone involved, have weekly calls, have monthly calls if you're on the front end. But it really starts with the borrower or soon to be borrower to go to RD and start working on potential scope of work and how to get that NOI up as high as possible.
Bob, can I throw in one more question for you too? Because
Sure.
We've talked in the last couple of sessions about the importance of only having one appraisal and one CNA, and that sometimes can be a rare occurrence. Do you have any advice to reduce the number of appraisals and CNAs a developer needs to get when they're working with 515 and 538?
Sure, and sometimes you do start one process over the other earlier. So if you are starting off at the same time, then you just want to make sure that, okay, who are all the sources of funds, and let's get on a call and talk about using one appraisal with the 515 requirements and the 538 requirements. A market study, 515, 538, the CNA, the phase one with the NEPA. If you can start that off and everyone's on the same page from the beginning, it's easy to share those reports. If you've, let's say, started down a path with on the 515 side and with RD before you got to the lender, then what you do as a lender is say, okay, send us the reports that you have, and let's see if what is in there and how good a shape they are, and we will try to do everything we can to use that same provider to just get an update to those reports and not have to go out and get a whole different firm. We try to use the reports that are out there that have already been reviewed, sometimes approved, and then we get reliance to them, and then make sure that the 538 requirements are in those reports, and use those same reports. So that's always our theme, because third-party reports can get very expensive without doubling up on them alone. I mean, you're talking 15, sometimes to 25, 30,000 depending on the level of work that's being done at the project. But if you can scale that, back and everyone's sharing reports and using the same reports or using Reliance, that's the best use of money.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you. We actually were just talking about that. I was talking about that with some partners yesterday about getting a third-party vendor who was able to do what was required first for the tax credit application, and then we'll be able to modify that as an update, like you said, for the CNA for the purposes of for the transfer application.
Yep. So and a lot of times for tax credit application, you have a phase one and a market study. Mm-hmm. So the project gets awarded, then they come to us for, even though we've supplied lender letters for the applications, but it's not real until you get the award of the tax credits. Then they come to us, and so we know we've got a market study in a phase one. So we take the market study because maybe they didn't know what form of debt execution. Let's say it's a new construction project. They didn't know whether they were using a 538 or some local financing. So we take the market study, we work with the provider. We typically have them do a simple addendum to the report that would address the 538 requirements and any other requirements that we have, and then obtain Reliance. So it's really an update to the report as long as it's not over a year old, again, so that we keep costs reduced and low for the borrower and the transaction.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I don't really see any other questions from y'all, and I think it was really good and good information to talk about. I will make sure we follow up with those term sheets and with the case studies that Bob provided. Also, we send out a recording of this session, and we'll send out the PowerPoints as well that Larry went through earlier. I also want to put a plug in for the rest of the Rural Preservation Academy and the work that we're doing for the rest of the year. As we kind of look at this, the preservation process as identification, and then the kind of process of acquisition and financing, which is kind of where we are now. We spoke a lot about identification early on with the CHAFA preservation database and also the USDA lists of expiring properties. We're in the meat of getting financing done. So our next session on August 19th will be about other financing sources. So should 538 not be the right fit, or should there be a need for rehab that doesn't fit necessarily into some of these other products? We'll be talking with Energy Outreach Colorado and how their rehab grant program works, also with some local CDFIs, Impact Fund, and Sharing Connections next on our next session. So I think that should be a good, as well as the Enterprise Community Loan Fund. So I think we'll have some good follow-up conversations on financing. And from there, we'll continue talking about, we'll have a buyer-sellers conference that'll be regional, hopefully helping to align those of you who are looking to acquire 515 or expiring or at-risk properties around with those who are looking to sell. And then also after that, some stewardship and property management conversations as we go forward for the rest of the year and to round out the year. So I'll be sending out that schedule as well. I really appreciate Bob. Thank you for participating and for joining us. And Larry, also thank you so much again for being my partner in this effort with this Colorado Rural Preservation Academy. And I look forward to talking to many of you in a couple weeks. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.